Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another program of Bring the World Home. It's a production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii, and each week we meet with a volunteer who served in one of the 138 countries around the world that the Peace Corps serves. Today our guest is Matt Johnson, who's recently returned from the Philippines. You're our first guest from the Philippines. I'd like to welcome you to our program.
Great, thanks, Joe.
One of our traditions here is to show our guests that we're out here in the middle of the Pacific in Hawaii, and even though we have a lot of people from the Philippines, which is not too far away from us, like I said, you're our first person to tell us about your experience in the Philippines.
Great.
One quick question though, what got you interested in the Peace Corps in the first place?
It's funny, that's a question a lot of people ask, I'm sure, to a lot of volunteers. When I was in college, I studied abroad in New Zealand, so that was the first time I actually experienced living in another country, and just had a lot of fun, learned a lot, and so that's really what got me interested in living in another country. Wanted to do something a little more different than say another English-speaking country. I wanted to go somewhere and actually be able to learn another language. So when I graduated from college, I started working and you know, doing the 9-to-5 type thing. I just wasn't quite ready to get into that.
Yes.
So you know, a friend of mine mentioned, why don't you look into the Peace Corps? So I went up to New York, interviewed, and initially thought I was going to Africa, but then they said, you're interested in the Philippines, so you have to be pretty flexible on, you know, wherever they say they're going to send you, you really have to be open for it. And I was like, yeah, I didn't really know anything about the Philippines. I didn't really know where it was. But I was like, okay, sign me up. And that's how it worked out.
Well, that sounds very typical to me, because when I was invited to go to Malaysia, I'd never heard of the country. I didn't know where it was, didn't know a thing about it, so it's not unusual, even in this day and age. What did you get your degree in school?
Actually, I studied information systems. It was under like a business degree as well.
Okay.
So with that background, the way Peace Corps works is that they invite you into a certain program. So it's not just a country, but it's also a certain program. The program I was invited to was Business Advising for Youth Development. That's basically all they told me, what I was going to be doing. I said, okay, youth, business, all right, let's do it. Sounds good.
I recognize all those words. I should be able to figure something out.
I was able to find Philippines on the maps. I was like, all right, I think I got everything I need. So that was the program that they put me into, and it worked out really well. That's I think it was a good program for me to be in. I was able to use a lot of the skills I learned in school and also my own personal interests as well. And I think it was a good combination.
Well, you had told me earlier that contrary to a lot of Peace Corps programs that have some kind of training out in a university or some other setting prior to going to the host country, and then nowadays there's a bit of training that takes place in country prior to going out to your actual assignment. You had told me that all of your training took place in country in the Philippines. What was that like? You had a bit of knowledge now, you looked up the Philippines and found out that they spoke some languages, and they flew you to the Philippines, and what happened? How did that reality contrast with your expectation at that point?
Yeah, it was interesting talking to you, saying that before the training for volunteers actually used to be held in the United States, which is hard for me to imagine doing that. I thought it was very beneficial for us to actually have the training in the country. We actually had language specific to where we were going to be assigned. The interesting thing about the Philippines is that there's over 100 different languages, which makes it extremely challenging for a foreigner coming in and trying to live and work and communicate at the same time.
Yes.
So we flew over. There's a group of 40 of us that flew over together. We met in Manila, which is the capital, for a few days, just kind of an orientation. And then they flew us to another island called Bohol. And that's where we actually had 2 months of training, where it was language, technical. This is training that's actually relevant to the job that we're going to be doing, as well as culture, learning some of the things about the Philippines, some do's and don'ts, which you need to have that background before you go off and you do something that could really jeopardize your next 2 years at your the site where you're located.
Quick question then. Your 2 months of training, you're in the country, you're immersed in language, culture, and job-related material. And then at the end of the 2 months, all of the 40 so people in your group were going to be doing the similar kinds of assignments, or at least you thought so at that point. Is that valid?
Well, the interesting thing with the training that we had, there's probably 5 different types of volunteers depending on the type of work that you're going to be doing. I was on the business side, then there's coastal resource management, there's also education volunteers and a few others as well.
All mixed together as part of this 40
all mixed together with this
people.
group of 40. So when you have your technical training, we would split up into our appropriate groups. But then language would also be, you'd be mixed again, because there was probably 6 or 7 different languages being taught in this training.
Depending upon where their assignments were going to
where you're going to be assigned, right.
manifest.
And what made that challenging was that we were actually living with host families during our training. So you have training class all day, and then you actually go home to a Filipino family that feeds you and takes you around, and which is a great part of the training. You actually, in my opinion, you learn more with the host family than you actually do in the
formal Peace Corps.
The classroom, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny because the language I was trying to learn in training was completely different from the language that my host family spoke. So I would go home and I'm trying to practice some of the words I learned in class with them. They're like, Matt, no, you got it all wrong. You know, you're supposed to say it like this. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I would go back to class and drive my instructor crazy because I'm speaking the wrong language to her. So I ended up learning more of my host family's language than the one I was supposed to.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, after the 2-month training period, you're tossed into the assignment. And did you feel that the training prepared you quite well for that, or how did you find your opportunity as it unfolded then?
I mean, I was definitely prepared to a certain point, but I don't think anybody can ever be fully prepared for basically getting off a boat into a new community on this little fishing village. But I think I had the basics, I had the background, and I know I had the support as well, that I could go into this confidently and know that, you know, I could do this. So the training was very beneficial, and you know, when you first get to the site, I could say simple phrases like, "Hi, my name is Matt, and I'm from Pennsylvania," and you know, blah blah blah. You know?
Yeah.
And everybody would just thought it was the greatest thing, seeing.
Had there been other volunteers in that community prior to you?
Actually, there had been. Surprisingly enough, there had been many volunteers before me, so they were familiar with volunteers, with Americans. So it was probably a little bit easier than for a volunteer who went into a village that's seeing an American or even a white person for the first time.
Right.
You could definitely imagine the shock value involved with that.
You got to the community of your assignment, and were they, did you find that what you were going to be doing was what you were training to do, or was it a whole new ball game for you?
That's a funny question. It's completely reverse of anything you would think that you would be doing for work. Basically, you get there and you think they would have something already set for you. Basically, I get there, I'm like, okay, so what's going on? What are we doing? They're like, all right, Matt, do your thing. What you got for us? Here I am, 6 months out of college. I'm like, I don't really have a thing yet. I don't really know what to do. So that's a typical challenge that you'll hear from volunteers, is that there isn't really a set project. You don't have your weekly activities scheduled for you. It's more, you have to show up and figure out where you fit into the whole system and what you can bring to the table.
Oh, well, this is a very interesting tact. And and I'd like you to reflect a little bit on the idea of being, as a volunteer, being flexible, going into the situation and thinking. I assume that you're thinking you're going to do one thing because you were trained in that modality.
Right.
And then you get to your assignment, you find out that you really have to be creative and ad lib. Is that what you're telling us?
Absolutely.
Is that a failure of the Peace Corps?
No,
training?
It's not a failure of the training. I mean, it's good to give something to the volunteer as something they can put their arms around and say, okay, I can use this when I get to my site. And a lot of the trainings I was taught, I was able to use with different projects that I became involved with.
Can you give us a quick example?
Well, training that we did was, since I was with the business advising group, we actually put on a business entrepreneurship youth camp where we invited a lot of kids from the local villages to come. And it was like a three-day, two-night camp where we had different activities of teaching them about profit, incomes and revenues and expenses, marketing, and then we actually had them create a business plan.
And did they comprehend that, those kinds of terms and concepts at this?
Yeah, I mean, we kept everything.
You weren't in a primitive, pre-mercantile society by any means then, right?
No. I mean, these are all very intelligent children.
Yeah.
A lot of these terms we were using, or the concepts, might have been the first time that they've heard of them before, but they were very able to pick up on these ideas and understand it and recognize how they can take it back to their village and work with their families or their friends in trying to do some type of business. And when you say business, I'm not talking about any type of big corporation or anything. It's more on just raising chickens or raising pigs that you can raise it and then sell it and make some money off it. That's the simple business terms that we're talking about. And
did you find that the host country nationals, the people in your village, accepted the idea that this was possible? Did they accept you as their leader or their mentor or their kumu, as we say here in Hawaii?
Well, it's funny when you first get to your site, you don't really think of yourself as an expert, but a lot of these different groups at my site were like, look to me as the business expert. Say, Matt, my business isn't working too well here. Help me out. And you're like, wow, I don't really know if I can help you. But then when you actually start talking with these people, a lot of times it's just small little things that's kind of holding them down that you can give them some advice on and say, hey, just a simple little thing like maybe writing down some of your accounting every now and then can help you keep track and let you know if you're actually making money or not. So it's funny how eventually you do become kind of this consultant or this expert in the community.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Peace Corps tries to inculcate in volunteers is to not put yourself above the people that you're working with. You don't want to come in as the ugly American. You don't want to turn them off by an American attitude that's inconsistent with the culture. Was this something that you experienced, and how did you deal with that? That's
a good point to bring up. This kind of goes back to identifying what you're going to be doing there. If you kind of come into this community with a set project that you're going to do, and you say, okay, everybody here needs to learn how to you know, increase their profits or whatever type of project. That's
everybody here has to make money in the first
Right, right. That's kind of coming in with the wrong attitude that, you know, I'm better than you are. I know what you need, so this is what we're going to do. Whereas you take kind of the asset needs approach where you actually work and talk with the people there and have them identify what do you need, what do you want. And that's more the important part is, you know, what do they actually want? Because if they don't want it, they're not going to be interested in it, and eventually, whatever the project is, it's going to fail.
So you came to that conclusion yourself, or was that developed during the training? I mean, were you trained to recognize that this attitude on your part would be necessary for some kind of success?
It was definitely taught to us in our training, but this isn't something that you can just say once, and people will, you know, recognize it and actually go by it. Yeah. And that's something that Peace Corps really does try to stress over and over again, that it's an assets-based approach of identifying what's already there in this community. Then you identify what's wanted, what's needed. You put those two together, and if there's anything missing, that's where the volunteer comes in. So if they did identify that they needed a business training, we can identify which parts are wanted, what do you actually want to learn, and then my job was actually try and find those groups of people that can do that training.
Yeah. And was that an easy chore once you kind of recognized the path that you could take, or the attitude that you need to embrace to achieve that? Was it doable?
I was definitely.
Were you successful there in your efforts, do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely had a lot of you know, baby steps in getting to these more successful projects. It was funny, when I first got there, I would try to do these business trainings on my own. Whereas I was like, okay, they brought me here as the business consultant, so I'll do a business training. And so I was picking up some of the language, and I was able to communicate, but it was kind of rough, and it's kind of, and
I can imagine.
Yeah, but you know, nice thing that Filipinos understand English as well. They're very, very good English speakers, so we're able to understand each other. But then eventually I realized that, why am I doing this all myself when I can get the local accountant at the mayor's office to come and do the section on accounting himself? He knows how to do this, and he can communicate it a lot easier than I could. So that's when you start making those connections, and you start bringing other resources to, you know, do more of the work. Eventually you become the facilitator, and not so much the trainer. And I think that's...
Well, that sounds like an epiphany for a volunteer. You're there, you volunteered to go do something, and then you realize that your function is to become a manager, in essence.
Yeah, and that's, in my opinion, that's absolutely what the volunteer's role is. And that's why they're starting to move away from a technical training approach for volunteers, where I'm actually going to teach you know, a business volunteer business skills, but it's going to be more on how to enter the community, how to identify resources that are there, and, you know, manage or take advantage of some of these resources that are there to get them to work with certain identified projects.
Well, you had told me earlier that after your 2 years of service, you stayed on to do what? Something along this lines, right?
Well, actually, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay. I stayed on to work with the next training of volunteers, and that's when they actually changed the style of the training from the technical training, giving the technical skills to volunteers, and moving it to a community entry type training, where you actually teach volunteers how to integrate into this new community, even before you can start working on projects. And that's a difficult thing for especially Americans to come into, because we really want to, be able to put our arms around something solid, saying, okay, I'm going to go to my community and this is what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. That's a scary feeling when only thing you've learned in training to go to this new site is how to interview the mayor, or how to, how
to fit in.
How to fit in, right. It seems very soft terms, and it's not something that we really normally think about. Uh-huh. But when you are going to live and work in such a different style, culture, and community, you really have to sit back and think about how you're going to do this. And there's different ways you can do it. You can do it successfully, or you can go in and make a lot of mistakes that can get yourself into a lot of trouble and make your job a lot harder for the next 2 years.
Well, you say one can make a lot of mistakes with a certain, sounds like a certain amount of experience behind you. Anything happen to you that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about...
everybody wants to be successful, but we're not always successful.
Absolutely. Right? Before you can be successful, you have to make a lot of mistakes. And that's a fun thing about talking with volunteers. They always have funny stories. And the one thing that I always remember is when I first got there, I went to this, it was kind of like a council meeting with kind of like a neighborhood council meeting. And so I go in there and I'm just planning on introducing myself, saying hi, I'm the new volunteer in town, just meeting you. Next thing I know, they're asking me for advice on how to clean up their neighborhood. There's a lot of trash around there. So I start, explaining, well, we could do some type of, cleanup. We organize everybody and have them come out with their bags, and we'll have a cleanup day. And then they're like, well, what are we going to do with the garbage? Are we just going to burn it? So I was like, well, no, burning's probably not the best thing to do. You should put it in some type of dump site. Well, they don't have a dump site. So next thing I know, we're walking around this neighborhood trying to identify the strategically appropriate dump site to put all this garbage in. And I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's too late now because I've already got them thinking that I'm this solid waste expert management guy. Yeah, I can't tell them I don't know. This beginning early in the in my
you're an American.
Project.
You should be able to tell them where to put some garbage, right?
Exactly. So it's just me walking around with a bunch of these councilmen trying to find a dump site in their neighborhood, and yeah, I didn't find that dump site. So. It was, so I learned pretty quickly I had to be very careful on what I said and what I suggested.
Engage brain before inserting mouth.
Exactly.
In the couple minutes that we have left, one of the title of our program is Bring the World Home. Could you share briefly with our audience what you're able to now utilize in your experience here in Hawaii, or since you've been back to the United States?
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny when I left the Philippines to go back home. I'm originally from outside of Philadelphia, and I thought I would just kind of go home and get a business type job or something. It really didn't have a whole lot to do with my experience in the Philippines, but actually ended up I was able to get a job here in Hawaii, actually developing a business training program for farmers, which is very close to what I was trying to do in the Philippines. And it's just funny to think that a lot of what I learned while I was in the Philippines I've been able to bring back and still use it with my work here in Hawaii.
Well, that is very revealing to the relevance of Peace Corps still to this day. A lot of people think, a lot of our audience might think that our Peace Corps experience is going to a primitive country and showing them how the American way to do things, but it's what I'm hearing you say is that you went to a country, learned how to do things, learned about yourself and brought that back to our modern Hawaii, and are doing essentially the same thing here today that you were doing in the Philippines for several years. In the minute that we have left, your ability to interact with Filipinos here in Hawaii is enhanced by your experience in the country itself, or do you find differences
Actually, no.
between Hawaiian Filipinos and Filipinos from the Philippines?
It's funny. There's been a lot of occasions where I'll hear in Filipinos speaking Tagalog here in Hawaii, and I'm able to kind of jump in with some quick comments, and you always get that same laugh, like, oh, why is a Holly speaking Tagalog, and it's always a great icebreaker, and I've met a lot of great Filipinos here, and
that's really great. Well, Matt, I appreciate your being able to join us today and share some of the knowledge that you gained in your Peace Corps service, and to our audience at home. I hope that you'll be able to join us again next week on another episode of Bring the World Home. We hope that it's been an informative and educational time for you this evening. Thank you again.
Great, thanks, Chip.